You hear about today's billionaires all the time, right? But have you ever stopped to think, who's the richest person ever? Like, in all of human history? Well, the answer's probably not who you're thinking of. Let's dig in.
Okay, so just to get our heads around this, let's take today's richest guy, Elon Musk. If you earned a totally normal, average salary, how long do you think you'd have to work to get as rich as him? The answer is, well, it's 8 million years.
Yeah, just let that number sink in for a second. 8 million years. That is 30 times longer than we as a species have even existed on this planet. It's just a completely insane scale of wealth to even think about. Seriously, in the time it took me to say that, he's probably made more money than most people see in a year.
So that must make him the richest person to ever live, right? Case closed? Well, no, not even close. And that's the big question we're tackling today. Because history has some serious heavy hitters who could make today's billionaires look, frankly, kind of poor.
All right, so first things first. Before we can crown a winner, we have to define our terms. What do we even mean by wealth? Because, it's not just about dollars and cents, especially when you're trying to compare a guy who makes rockets to, say, a Roman emperor. So for our purposes here, let's think of wealth as total control. Yeah, money is a huge part of it, but so is political power, how much land you own, and what kind of resources you can command. It's the whole package. It's really the only fair way to stack these historical figures up against each other.
Okay, let's get into our contenders. We're gonna look at people whose fortunes came from all different kinds of power. And we'll start with a guy who had a problem most of us can't even imagine. Literally too much cash.
And that brings us to contender number 1, Pablo Escobar. Now, his wealth was different. It wasn't sitting in some bank account or in stocks. It was in actual physical stacks of cash. Piles and piles of it. So much that it became a massive, massive headache. Think about this. The guy was pulling in so much money, he was spending $1,000 a week just on rubber bands to wrap it all up. And he couldn't clean it fast enough, so he was losing something like $2 billion a year just because rats were eating it or it was getting ruined by water. His peak worth, adjusted for today, is about $80 billion. Super impressive, for sure, but not enough to win this contest. All right, now let's do a complete 180. Our next contender is Joseph Stalin. This guy was technically broke. He owned basically nothing. The story goes he just let his paychecks pile up on his desk without ever cashing them. But see, he didn't need money. Why? Because he had absolute, total control. His power was so immense that when he had a stroke that would eventually kill him, his own guards were too scared to call a doctor for 12 hours. He personally controlled the entire Soviet economy, which today would be worth something like $10 trillion. Okay, so we've had cash, we've had absolute power. What about just land? Let's talk about our next contender, the one and only Genghis Khan. At its height, his Mongol Empire controlled a staggering 20% of all the land on Earth. Now, he wasn't a guy who hoarded treasure. He mostly gave it away to his soldiers. But if you just look at the value of the land he conquered, you're talking a theoretical net worth of $130 trillion. Just mind-blowing. All right, now let's jump in our time machine and go way back to the age of ancient empires, where wealth was on a whole other level. Meet Mansa Musa. He was the king of the Mali Empire back in the 14th century, and his kingdom sat on top of the most valuable thing in the world back then, gold. A lot of gold. We're talking about a guy who controlled roughly half of all the gold in the known world. He's most famous for this pilgrimage he took to Mecca. He brought a caravan of 60,000 people and just gave away gold. He handed out so much of it that he completely destroyed the local economies along his route for a decade. His wealth is so vast, people say it's basically incalculable. But the best guesses put him north of 400 billion. Okay, next up, the original Roman Emperor Augustus Caesar. And when we talk about his wealth, we're not just talking about taxes. This guy literally owned entire countries. Like, they were his personal property. When he beat Mark and Anthony and Cleopatra, he didn't just conquer Egypt, he basically put it in his own name. It became his private piggy bank. Between that and controlling all of Rome's money, his personal fortune would be worth about $5 trillion today. Yeah, trillion with a T.
All right, let's fast forward a bit. We're moving into the Gilded Age, the late 1800s. And here, a whole new kind of wealth was being created, not by conquering lands, but by building massive industrial empires.
And the undisputed king of that era was John D. Rockefeller. His company, Standard Oil, wasn't just in the oil business. For all intents and purposes, it was the oil business. At his peak, he controlled 90% of all oil in America.
So get this, back in 1913, his personal fortune, just his money, was equal to 2% of America's entire economic output for the year. 2% of the entire GDP. That kind of personal control over a national economy, it just doesn't exist today.
So, we've seen emperors, conquerors, kings, monopolists, some truly staggering fortunes. But who actually wins? Who is the richest person in history?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. If you just compare their share of the US economy, Rockefeller actually looks richer. His 2% is a bigger slice than Elon Musk's 1.4% today. So, Rockefeller wins, right? End of story? Nope, not quite. And here is the absolute key to the whole question. Yes, Rockefeller had a bigger slice of the pie, but the pie itself was way smaller. The entire US economy back in 1913 was 22 times smaller than it is today. The sheer size of the modern global economy, all connected by technology, it's a completely different ballgame.
Which brings us to our final answer. You have to think of it like this. Elon is the biggest fish in the biggest pond that has ever existed. And unlike a king or a dictator, his wealth is his. It's not tied to a country, it's personal, it's relatively liquid, and we can actually count it, something you can't really do with an ancient king's fortune. So when you factor in the massive growth of the world's economy, he actually comes out on top. So there you have it. For now, at least, Elon Musk holds the title. But if there's one lesson from all of this, it's that the pond just keeps getting bigger. The world economy keeps growing, and that leaves us with a pretty exciting question. Who's going to be next?